Hi, and welcome to this section of the Basic Math Word Problem Tutor. And this section we're going to switch gears a little bit, and we're going to have word problems. We're going to have problems that involve adding fractions, word problems that involve adding fractions. And I'm really excited about teaching the next few sections of the class dealing with adding and subtracting and multiplying and dividing fractions, because to be honest with you, fractions give a lot of people problems, okay? And I have a lot of examples in this section on purpose to reinforce things. Fractions give a lot of people problems, and I think the reason is because growing up you deal with numbers all the time. You deal with 1 and 2 and 10 and 20 and 15. Those are numbers. Those are things we understand. But then when you start putting numbers on top of other numbers with a bar, you're making a fraction, and they're different numbers, and sometimes you have to find this thing called a common denominator, and sometimes you don't. And what does it mean to have 52 over 75? What does that mean? Okay, there's a lot of questions that aren't really natural to us because we don't see 3/8 of a piece of wood all the time on the ground. We see one piece of wood or two pieces of wood. We don't see 5/8 or 10/64. Okay, so it's sometimes confusing. But we're going to cut through all of that here, and we're going to tackle the word problems that deal with adding fractions together in this section, and we're going to get a lot of practice with adding them together in the common denominator and all of that. So without talking any further, let's just go ahead and get started. The first problem says, and this is real practical because Thanksgiving we all like to eat our pie, right? You have 1/4 or 1/4 of a pie, and someone gives you 3/4 of another pie. Okay, how much pie do you have? Okay, altogether. So I have 1/4 of a pie, and I have 3/4 of a pie that somebody else gives me. The question is, how much pie do you have? Okay, so let's think about this for a second. We know that one person gives us 1/4 of a pie, or 1/4 of a pie is another way of saying that, and we're adding to it 3/4 of a pie. So just as before in the course, we know that we have to add these things together because one person gives us 1/4 of a pie, another person gives us 3/4 of a pie, and we're trying to find out how much do we have all together. So we know we have to add them together. The question is, how do you do that? These numbers look kind of weird at first, having a 3 and the 4 and the 1 and the 4 with the line. I mean, what does that mean, okay? Well, I like to work in pictures, so let's do that. What does 1/4 mean, okay? If you have a pie, okay, all this means is very, very simple. All this means is if you cut this pie into 4 pieces, that's what the bottom number means. How many pieces of this pie did I cut, okay? Cut the pie into. Then what I have is, I don't have a whole pie or a half a pie, I have 1/4 of a pie. So that means I have this much of a pie. Because I cut the pie into 4 pieces, which is what this number means, 4 pieces, but I only actually have one of those pieces, so that's what the top number means, okay? And I'm adding to it some more pie. What does this number look like, okay? Again, I'm cutting the pie into 4 pieces because that's the bottom number, but I don't just have one piece of the pie over here, I have 3 more pieces. So I have this piece, that's one piece, I have this piece here, and I have this piece here. So I have 3 pieces over here. So I think you can see by pictures, okay, that if I have 1/4 of a pie and I add it to 3/4 of a pie, I'm going to have 1 pie total, okay? Because just in pictures, without any math at all, when you do this, then this piece, I could just take this one piece of pie and stick it right in here, and then I'm going to have a whole pie. So I would have this, and I would have this piece, and I would have this piece here, and I would have this piece here. I would have 4 pieces of pie, okay, which would be 4 pieces of pie out of 4 pieces of pie, which is 1. Because, and the secret is, fractions is the same thing as division, okay? 4 divided by 4, you should know, gives you 1. Because 4 times 1 is 4, okay? So, when you're doing your fractions, the number on the top is really being divided by the number on the bottom, and in this case you can actually do that division. 4 divided by 4 gives you 1, okay? So put that in the back of your head. You know that 1/4 of a pie plus 3/4 of a pie must give you, in the end, 1 whole pie. You know this because we've shown it in pictures. So how do you do it with the math, okay? Anytime you add fractions together, the bottom numbers must be the same. In this case, the problem I've given you already has the bottom number the same, so that's great. We don't have to do anything to the bottom number. We just keep it along for the ride. So, you see how easy it is. We haven't even added anything. 1/4 plus 3/4, you just put a 4 on the bottom. You don't change it, you don't add it, you don't do anything. You just keep it along for the ride, okay? And when we add fractions, this bottom number, which we call, by the way, the denominator, okay, must be the same in order to add them. Since they are the same, all you have to do is just add the top numbers together. 1 plus 3 gives us 4 on the top, okay? So let's review the bidding here. The bottom numbers were the same, which we have to add fractions. You cannot add fractions unless the bottom number is the same. So they are the same in this case, so we just carry it along. We don't add it, we don't subtract it, we don't do anything, we just carry it along. Because they are the same, now that we can just add the top two numbers. 1 plus 3 gives us 4. And because I told you that fractions is really just another way of dividing, 4 divided by 4 gives you 1. So the answer is 1 pi. So the answer to the problem, you have 1/4 of a pi and someone gives you 3/4 of another pi. How much pi do you have in all? You've shown through your math that you have 1 pi. Okay? Now, this is a simple problem for a lot of reasons. It's simple because we cut the pie into the same number of pieces, and I could draw a nice pretty picture for you. Okay? But the basic idea is the same. When you add two fractions, you must have the bottom number the same. If these bottom numbers are not the same, then it's up to you to make them the same. And I will show you how to do that here in a few problems. Once they are the same, you just simply add the top numbers. And here you have 4 over 4. And knowing that a fraction is the same thing as division, 4 divided by 4 is 1. Okay? All right, let's move on to a problem that's a little bit different. It's really no harder than that one. It's just a little bit different. You purchase 1/3 of a brownie from Jenny and 1/3 of another brownie from Max. How much brownies, or how many brownies, do you have? How much of a brownie do you have? You purchase 1/3 of a brownie from Jenny and 1/3 of another brownie from Max. How much brownie do you have? Okay, so we know we're going to have to add these because going back to our word problems that we've been doing in this entire class, we're given something and then somebody else gives us something else and the problem says, how much do you have? And what it's saying without saying it in words is, how much do you have altogether? Because you're given two things and you're adding them up to see how much you have. Okay, so in math, you're given 1/3 of a brownie and you're adding to it 1/3 of another brownie, and you're supposed to add these things together. Okay? So, I like pictures. For the first few problems, we'll do pictures anyway. So, what does this mean? Here is a brownie. Let's pretend it is a circular brownie. Okay? And we divide this brownie up into 3 parts. Okay? Not 4 parts as before, but 3 parts because the bottom number is 3. We've cut this brownie up into 3 equal parts. It doesn't look so equal with my drawing, but it should be 3 equal parts. But I don't have all of the brownie. I only have 1 piece. So I only have this piece of the brownie, let's say. 1/3 of a brownie. And you can just use your common sense. I mean, this looks like 1/3. You've used that in language all the time. I have 1/3 of something. This is what it is. I have 1/3 of that brownie. And somebody is adding to it, or you are adding to it. Here's another brownie, but again, I don't have the whole thing. I only have this piece, because I have another 1/3 of another brownie. And the question is, how much brownie do I have in the end? Okay? So, if you think about it, here's 1/3 of a brownie, and here's another third. If I add them together, okay, this piece is just this one, and this one I can just stick it over here. That would be this piece. Okay, this piece I never got. Okay, it's still empty in the pie player in the brownie tray. But now I don't have 1/3 of a brownie. I have 2/3 of a brownie. 1, 2, 2/3. So you see how this stuff is starting to make sense. It's not complicated. It's not crazy. It's not nutso. It's just different than regular numbers. Okay, fractions basically deal with numbers less than 1. Okay, that's why they're useful. So you don't have 1 brownie here. You don't have 5 brownies here. You have 2/3 of a brownie, which means not a whole brownie, just 2/3 of a brownie. So you have about this much, okay, because this is 2 parts out of 3, okay? So by pictures, we have solved the problem, okay? Now let's do it in terms of math. We're adding 1/3 to 1/3, and we said the bottom numbers must be the same in order to add fractions together. In this case, they are already the same because I've constructed the problem that way. So 3 just comes along for the ride. You just put him down. You're not adding here. You're not doing anything. You're just carrying him over. That's what you're doing, okay? Now, once they are the same number, all you do is add the tops. 1 plus 1 is 2. Okay, so this is the answer. 2/3 of a brownie. Okay, so you can see we got exactly the same answer. One involved pictures, right? And another one just involved math. Now you can do this without pictures now. You see, now that you know what you're doing. If the bottom number is the same, you carry it along and the top numbers get added together. 2/3 of a brownie. Okay, now the next problem is a little more challenging, but I'll walk you through it and you'll understand it, okay? The problem says a glass has 1/4 of a cup of water, okay? 1/4 of a cup of water. You add an additional 1/3 cup of water to the glass. How much water is now in the glass? So you need to add these two things together because you start out with 1/4 of a cup and you add water to it, which is 1/3 of a cup additional. So you raise the water level in the glass, and now you're asked how much water is in the glass. Okay, so you're going to add the 1/4 of a cup to the 1/3 of a cup, so let's do it. Okay, let's do it. So what we're doing in terms of math is we're saying 1/4 of a cup of water plus 1/3 of a cup of water. What is that going to equal? Okay, what is that going to equal? Well, first thing is, I told you, in order to add fractions, and by the way, we'll look at pictures in a second. We'll do that in just a minute, but before we do that, we must have the bottom number, which is called the denominator, exactly the same in order to add these fractions. Until that is the case, you cannot add these fractions together. You just can't do it. So the first thing you look when you try to do this is you look and you see, are these bottom numbers the same? And of course, they're not the same. So I told you before, if they're not the same, it's going to be up to you to make them the same. And let me show you how to do that, okay? All you have to do to make them the same is, let me tell you one thing here. A fraction, okay, what you're going to have to do is multiply this fraction by something on the top and the bottom, okay, so that the bottom number is the same. And you're going to multiply this something by the top and the bottom in order to make that the same. Let me show you what I'm talking about here. Here's 1/4. Okay, and here's our 1/3. Okay, now we're going to multiply this fraction, this 1/4. Let me just go ahead and write it down, and then let me show you why we did it this way. We're going to multiply this fraction by 3/3, okay, which is another fraction, and we're going to multiply this fraction by 4/4, which is a fraction in and of itself. Now you're saying this is getting complicated. Well, it's really not getting that complicated. What you want to do is make this bottom number the same. Okay? Now, what we're doing here is, what is 3/3? Well, 3/3 is the same thing as 3 divided by 3, which is 1. What is 4/4? Well, that's the same thing as 4 divided by 4, which is 1. All I'm doing is I'm taking 1/4 and I'm multiplying it by 1. And I'm taking 1/3 and I'm multiplying it by 1. I'm just writing it this way because of the following. When I multiply fractions, all you do is you multiply the top and then you multiply the bottom. That's all you have to do. You don't have any common denominators or anything complicated. All you do to multiply this is you say 1 times 3 gives me 3. And on the bottom, 4 times 3 gives me 12. And I'm adding it to this over here, which is 1 times 4 gives me 4 over 3 times 4 gives me 12. So now you can see why I did it. Because I want the bottom numbers to be the same. I don't care what number it is, okay? I just need them to be the same because you cannot add fractions unless the bottom number is the same. So I can multiply any fraction by 1, and I can multiply this fraction by 1. I just chose these numbers to be 3/3 and 4/4 so that the bottom number would be 12. That's all I was doing. I wanted to multiply this by 3 and I wanted to multiply this by 4, and so I did 3/3 and 4/4 to make these bottom numbers 12. And then you have to do the multiplication to make it legal. So what I'm getting at here, okay, in a real nutshell, is this problem here is exactly the same as this one. This addition, it looks different, okay, and that's what makes fractions complicated looking. It looks different, 3/12 and 4/12, but it is exactly the same as 1/4 and 1/3, and that's why it works. Okay? So, continuing on. Now that we have the bottom numbers the same, what do? Well, the bottom numbers are the same, so you keep it. You just put the 12 there, and then you add the top. 3 plus 4 gives us 7. So the answer is 7/12 cup of water. 7/12 cup. So that just means if you divide that cup into 12 equal divisions, you'd have 7 of them. That's what that means, okay? Now let me show you one more thing before we get going here, just to make sure that you understand that these are really the same things, okay? What does 1/4 look like? We've talked about that many times. Here is 1/4. Divided into 4 pieces, there's 1 piece. What does 1/3 look like? Okay? We're going to divide this into 3 parts, and you're going to get 1 equal part. Okay, that's 1/3. Now let me ask you this. What does 3/12 look like? I'm going to draw a bigger circle so I can make it clear. Okay, here's 4 pieces. I'm going to divide this into 12 pieces because it's out of 12 pieces. There's 4 pieces, and then here makes 6 pieces, and then here. So I have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10. So I'm going to do it one more time. Now, how many pieces do I have? 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12. 12 pieces. My picture isn't perfect, so they should be equal pieces, but that's the big picture here. Okay, so now I have my 12 equal pieces, and how many pieces do I have? I have 3 pieces. So here's 1 piece, 2 piece, 3 piece. 3 out of 12 pieces. Now notice that this 3 out of 12 looks an awful lot like 1 out of 4. And in fact, it's exactly the same thing. This 3 out of 12 is exactly the same amount of pie or water or whatever it is you're talking about as 1/4. 1/4 and 3/12 look different, but they're exactly the same because I've shown you they're the same by drawing it. Okay? And looking at 4/12, you get the same idea here. You have, here's 4 pieces, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, and 12. There's 12 pieces, and now I have 4 pieces, which is 1, 2, 3, 4. And my drawing isn't to scale. You see, it's a little bit more than what we had over here. It looks an awful lot like this, okay? Because 4/12 is exactly the same thing as 1/3 of something, okay? So what I'm saying here is by changing the problem, by multiplying these two numbers by 1 and by 1, you have changed nothing. You just changed the way in which it looks to let you add them up. So just try to choose a number on top of another number so that the bottom numbers, when you multiply them together, will give you the same number down here. And we're going to work some more examples like this to make it clear how to do it. So if you don't feel like you totally understand that, we'll do quite a few more of these things. The next problem says, a candy store mixes 1 1/4 pounds of chocolate with 2 1/4 pounds of caramel. How much candy do you have in all? So this is a dead giveaway again. You're going to add them together because you're given 1 1/4 pounds of chocolate with 2 1/4 pounds of caramel. How much do you have in all? So that means you're going to add them all together. So these kinds of fractions are what we call mixed fractions. You have 1 1/4. This means 1 pound plus 1/4 of a pound. That's what this means. Okay, plus 2 1/4 means here's 2 pounds with another 1/4 of a pound. So this is the chocolate and this is the caramel, so we're adding them together. Okay, now what's this going to equal? I'm going to show you 2 ways to do this. The first way is this is 1 plus 1/4 pound, and this is 2 plus 1/4 pound. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to say 1 plus 2 gives me 3. This is 3 pounds right off the bat because here's 1 1/4, here's 2 1/4. So I'm definitely going to have 3 pounds at least, plus, and over here, 1/4 plus 1/4. 1/4 plus 1/4. This parentheses stuff, don't let it confuse you or upset you or scare you. It just means that I'm keeping these together here because I want to show you that this 3 comes from the 1 plus the 2, and these 1/4 plus 1/4 just come from these right here. So I'm just grouping them together. That's all I'm doing here. So what you're going to have is 3 plus, and look at here, you have 2 fractions and you can add them together. And notice that the bottom number, the denominator, is the same, so it's 4. okay? And on the top you have 1 plus 1, which is 2. And we can do that because the bottom number was the same, so we just simply add the top number. The bottom number comes along for the ride and we add the top numbers. So 1 plus 1 is 2. Now, what you have here is 3 2/4. Okay? And if you remember back from your fractions in my other course, the 1st through 7th grade tutor, and it has a lot of practice with how to deal with fractions and how to simplify them and everything else. When you write a fraction, you always need to try to simplify it. And that just means you're writing it in the lowest terms. Just like in the other problem over here, you can write things in terms of, you can write 3/12, and that's exactly the same thing as 1/4, okay? You can simplify that 3/12 to 1/4, and those are exactly the same number. That's what we were saying. Well, 2/4, when you really think about it, if this is 4 pieces of something and I have 2 pieces right here, 2/4 sure does look like 1/2 of a pie, okay? So I'm telling you that it's equal to 1/2 of a pie, but you need to know how to do that. What you do is, can you divide the top number and the bottom number by the same thing an even number of times? Okay, can you do that? If you divide the top number by 2, you'll get 1. 2 divided by 2 is 1. Then you divide the bottom number also by 2. 4 divided by 2 is 2. You can divide in a fraction, you can multiply or divide the top and the bottom number by the same number as long as you do it to the top and the bottom. So just like before, we were multiplying the top and the bottom by the same number, you can divide the top and the bottom number by the same number as long as you do it to both. 2 divided by 2 is 1, 4 divided by 2 is 2, and so that's why we get the 1/2 down here, okay? And what we're trying to do is we're trying to get into a form that you can't do any more dividing. You can't simplify this anymore because the only number that goes into 1 is 1, and 2 divided by 1 is 2, and so this is totally simplified. You can't go any more, okay? If you had something like 5/10, you would simplify that by saying, what can I divide into the top and the bottom to make this thing simpler and go an even number of times? 5 divided by 5 is 1. 10 divided by 5, the same number, 5, is 2. So I get 1/2. Okay? So you can continue simplifying these things as long as you know what to do. So the answer is 3.5 pounds. Okay? 3.5 pounds of chocolate is the total amount when you mix the chocolate with the caramel. Now there's another way to do it, and let me show you that because sometimes on your test you'll be asked to do this. If you have 1 1/4, okay, 1 1/4 pounds, that can be written as what we call an improper fraction, okay? And the way you do this is you go 4 times 1 is 4, plus 1 is 5, and you keep the 4 on the bottom. So we converted this to what we're calling an improper fraction. Improper, okay? 4 times 1 is 4, plus 1 is 5, 5/4. Improper is written this way because the top number is bigger than the bottom, and that's why they call it improper. The math guys call it improper. It doesn't really matter what you call it. It's a fraction just the same as any other fraction. It's converting this mixed fraction into an improper fraction. Now the other number they gave you was 2 1/4, and how would we convert that? 4 times 2 is 8, plus 1 is 9, so 9 goes on the top, and 4 just comes along for the ride, so you just keep that. So we've converted both of these things into improper fractions, and since we're adding them together, we just can add them together like this. Notice now that the bottom number is the same, so that just stays along for the ride, no change. And the top number, 9 plus 5, is, I think you can convince yourself, 14. So you get 14/4, okay? So you've done the addition. This is the answer, but anytime you have a fraction with a bigger number on the top than the bottom, you want to generally convert it to a mixed fraction, okay? So remember, this is division, 14 divided by 4. How many times can 4 go into 14? That's what you need to ask yourself. We'll just start thinking about it. 4 times 2 is 8. 4 times 3 is 12. 4 times 4 is 16. Well, that's too many because I only have 14. So 4 times 3 is 12. So we can go in 3 times. That's why I put a 3 here. 3 times. 4 times 3 is 12. There's 2 left over between 12 and 14. So I'll put 2 fourths. Okay, that's how I write the rest of it. 3 and 2 fourths. Okay, because 4 goes into 14 3 times. 4 times 3 is 12, so I put the 3 here. You can go 3 times. You got to look at what's left over. 4 times 3 is 12. The difference between 12 and 14 is 2. So I put 2 over 4, which is the same 4 here. And don't forget, I can try to simplify any fraction that I see. So I'm going to simplify this. 2 divided by 2 is 1. 4 divided by 2 is 2, because I'm dividing top and bottom by the same. And you can see, after all of this stuff here, that you get the same answer either way. So what I want to show you overall is that you can just add the whole numbers. 1 plus 2 gives you 3, and then just add the fractions, which is what we did here, getting 2 fourths and then simplifying to 1/2, so 3 1/2. Or you could convert these to improper fractions. 4 times 1 is 4, plus 1 is 5, so 5 fourths, and then convert the other one to an improper fraction, and then add the improper fractions. It's just that in the end, this is the answer, 14 divided by 4, 14 fourths, but you need to convert that generally back into your mixed fraction, which is what you want to do on your test. So you do that by dividing. 14 divided by 4 gives you 3, with a remainder of 2, because 3 times 4 is 12. Difference between 12 and 14 is 2, 2 fourths. You got to keep that fourths here. And then you just simplify the 2 fourths into the 1/2, just like that. Okay, the next problem says if you drive 6 3/8 miles to pick up a friend and then drive 4 1/4 miles to the store, how far do you drive? So you know you're going to have to add these two things together, because you're driving 6 3/8 miles to pick up a friend, and then from there driving 4 1/4 miles to the store. How many miles do you travel altogether is what you're asked to find here. So you're going to have to add them up. So what you're going to do is you're going to have your 6 3/8 plus your 4 1/4. Okay? So these are your fractions here, and you're going to have to add them up. So what you can do is, what I like to do is just add my whole numbers together first, because I know I have 6 and 4, and that's going to give me 10 right away. So I know I'm going to have 10 plus, but I still have this 3/8 hanging out here, and I'm still going to have this 1/4 hanging out here over here. So I just need to add those fractions together, and then I'm going to have the answer. But I know I've got the 10 because 6 plus 4 is 10. Now I'm just going to add these fractions. So how do I do that? Okay, how do I do that? Well, we already said you have to have the bottom numbers the same. Okay, you have to have the bottom numbers the same, and they're not the same. So I need to make them the same. Okay, so what am I going to do that? Well, in order to do that, I need to change one or both of these fractions to have the bottom number the same. If I were to multiply this fraction by 2 over 2, then the bottom number will be 8, because 4 times 2 is 8, and I have an 8 here, so that's why I'm doing that. I don't have to touch this fraction, because he's already have an 8. He already has an 8 on the bottom. Here, I'm just messing around with this fraction, multiplying by 2 over 2, because again, 2 over 2 is just 1. I can multiply anything by 1, okay? And I'm doing that to get the bottom number the way I like it. So I'm going to have 10 plus 3/8 plus, now let's do this multiplication. 1 times 2 on the top gives you 2, and 4 times 2 on the bottom gives you 8. Now these fractions are in a form that are really easy to deal with. 10 plus, okay, on the bottom it's 8, and that just stays the same. You carry it along when you add the fractions. And now you just add the top. 3 plus 2 is 5. So you have 10 plus 5/8, which is the same exact thing as saying 10 and 5/8. That's what this means, 10 plus 5/8. Okay, so if you drive 6 3/8 miles to pick up a friend, and then you drive 4 1/4 miles to the store, you actually drive 10 and 5/8 miles all together. Okay, so you take it one step at a time. You add your whole numbers, you add your fractions. And in order to add your fractions, you've got to change one of them to make the bottom number the same so that you can add them. I can multiply any fraction by 1. So in this case, I pick 2 over 2 because that gives me a bottom number of 8. I do the multiplication and then I do the addition. Okay, so we're getting a little bit more complicated, but this is it. I mean, if you understand this, and by watching this a few times I think you will, you're going to be doing good. The next problem says a father is 5 7/8 feet tall. His son is 3.5 feet tall. If the son stands on the shoulders of the father, how tall are they put together? So you know you're going to have to add because it says how tall are they put together. You've got the height of the father and the height of the son. You stack them up. How tall are they when you put them together? So we know that we're going to add 5 7/8 foot of the father plus the 3.5 feet of the son. Okay, we know we're going to do this. Okay, and we also know, because we've been doing this a few times, we can just add these numbers out in front. Because I have a 5 and I have a 3, I can just add that, making 8. 5 plus 3 is 8. Okay, but don't forget I have these fractions here. So I've still got to add 7/8 and I've still got to add 1/2. Okay, so now all I got to do is figure out how to add these fractions together, and then I've got the answer. Okay, so I'm going to have my 8 plus 7/8 plus 1/2, and I'm going to change this 1/2 into something with a bottom number of 8. What can I multiply 2 by to give me 8? I got to multiply by 4. But in order to do that, I've got to multiply by 4 over 4 because that is 1. And I can multiply any fraction by 1. So I haven't really changed anything. I just changed the way it looks. Okay? So what I'm going to have is 8 plus 7/8 plus 1 times 4 gives me 4. 2 times 4 gives me 8. So I've just done this multiplication here. Now again, 4/8 looks different, but it is not. It is exactly the same thing as 1/2. Okay? So now I can do this addition. 8 plus. On the bottom is 8, so that just comes along for the ride. And on the top, you add them. 7 plus 4 is going to give you 11, because starting at 7, 8, 9, 10, 11. And 8 plus 11 over 8 is going to be the following. Notice over here, this fraction, by the way, this is the answer. 8 plus 11 over 8, that's the answer. But over here, 11 over 8, this is an improper fraction like we've talked about before, okay? You have a bigger number on the top than the bottom. And because a fraction is the same thing as division, okay, well, let's go ahead and divide. How many times does 8 go into 11? Well, it only goes one time, because 8 times 1 is 8, and 8 times 2 is 16, but that's too many. So it only goes one time. 8 times 1 is 8. Now, how many are left over from 8 to 11, okay? What's the remainder there? Starting at 8, 9, 10, 11. I've only got 3 left over, so I put it here, and I've got to put it over 8, because that's what the fraction is. So 8 goes into 11 one time with 3 8s left over, because it goes one time starting with 8, 9, 10, 11. That leaves me 3. The difference between 8 and 11 is 3, so 3 8s. So in the end, 8 plus 1 and 3 8s is going to be 9 and 3 8s, because I can add these whole numbers together, and I just keep my fraction. So if I have a father that stands 5 7/8 feet, and I have a son that stands 3.5 feet, and I add them together, they're going to stand a total of 9 3/8 feet tall. And I just add the whole numbers, and then I add the fractions separately, and I convert one of the fractions by multiplying by 1, but it's 4 over 4, so that I can make the bottom the same, so that I can add them. And the only trick here is that this was an improper fraction, so I needed to convert that by actually doing the dividing, and then you get your answer. Okay, the final problem is going to say, how much wood do you need to build an 8.5 by 11 inch picture frame? So you have a picture frame, it's a rectangle, okay, and you know that this dimension is 11 inches, and this dimension is 8.5 inches. That's what it means when it says 8.5 by 11 inches. So how much wood do you need? Well, I'm going to need wood for this side, and this side, and this side, and this side. So I'm going to add up all of these lengths. So I know I'm going to be adding these things together. So I'm going to have 8.5 inches plus 8.5 inches, because I've got this side and this side. That's 8.5 inches 2 times, plus 11 plus 11, because I have 11 inches on this side and 11 inches this side. So I'm adding up all of the wood that I need all the way around. So let's do that. Starting with the fraction. 8 plus 8 is going to give me 16, plus 1/2 plus 1/2. I'm just going to leave that alone for now, because that's the fraction, and I don't want to mess with that yet. Plus 11 plus 11 is 22. I think you can figure that out by just adding 11 and 11 up on your fingers. It's going to give you 22. Okay, so I still have these fractions to deal with, but I can still add the 16 to the 22. And I think you'll find that that's going to equal 38. Okay, because 22 and 16, starting here, 6 plus 2 gives me 8, and 2 plus 1 gives me 3. Okay, so the 16 plus the 22 gives me 38. And now I just have to add the 1/2 to the 1/2. Okay, now how do I do that? Well, the bottom numbers are already the same, so it comes along for the ride. And I just leave it, and then I just add the top numbers. 1 plus 1 is 2. Okay, 1 plus 1 is 2. So notice here I have 2 over 2. Okay, I have 2 over 2. And we said that fractions are really just division, so 2 divided by 2 gives me 1. So now I have 38 plus 1, which is 39 inches. That's how much wood I actually need. So it looks a little bit complicated, but it's really not. I'm adding up my 8.5 and my 8.5 and my 11 and my 11. 8 plus 8 gave me the 16. The 1/2 plus the 1/2 just hangs along for the ride. 11 plus 11 gives me my 22. And then I can add the 16 and the 22, giving me the 38. And then to add these fractions is pretty easy because the bottom number is already the same, so I keep it along. And then 1 plus 1 gives me my 2. And then I just have to remember that 2 divided by 2 is 1, and 38 plus 1 is 39. So in this section, we've covered a very important topic. We've talked about word problems that involve addition of fractions. Very, very important. You'll be asked these things time and again. It's really no different than any other kind of problem, but you have to be comfortable working with fractions. And the main thing when adding fractions is that you have to make sure that bottom number there, the denominator, is the same. You cannot add fractions unless that is the same. And if they're not the same, then you must make them the same by multiplying some of those fractions by the number 1, and you write that number 1 as something over something, like 2 over 2, or 3 over 3, or 4 over 4. You can multiply it by whatever you want as long as you're multiplying by 1, which means you have the same number on top and the same number on the bottom. And then you do that so that in your fraction you have the same number on the bottom, and then you can add those fractions, and then you're clearly on your way to be able to solve word problems involving the addition of fractions.